So let's get more specific here. AllThat'sInteresting.com has a pretty detailed write-up that we're going to go over now. This is by Marco Margaritoff, September 26, 2021. So relatively new write-up here. Inside the horrific Oklahoma Girl Scout murders that remain unsolved to this day. Summer camp has been a staple of the American experience for generations. In 1977, however, summer camp took on a new and horrible connotation for many, thanks to one shocking triple homicide right out of a horror movie, the Oklahoma Girl Scout murders at Camp Scott. Lori Farmer, Michelle Goose, and Doris Milner, all between 8 and 10, were raped, bludgeoned, and strangled to death. Their bodies were found shortly before dawn on Monday, June 13th by a counselor shuffling toward the showers at around 6 a.m. Spotting 3 sleeping bags oddly strewn about 150 feet into the woods, she approached. It was horribly clear almost immediately that 10-year-old Doris was dead. Seeing her corpse atop her sleeping bag led the counselor to run for help, believing that an accident had occurred. Only with the camp director and nurse in tow did the full truth emerge, as the other bags were unzipped to yield more bodies. Tragically, it had been only one day since Camp Scott opened its doors for the summer. A shy newcomer and one of the only black girls at the camp, she had tearfully waved her parents goodbye but made fast friends with tent mates Lori Farmer and Michelle Goose. Braving their first night and storm together, they were dead by dawn. Authorities were as confounded as the parents. And what's worse, the murders remain unsolved to this day. This is the chilling story of the Oklahoma Girl Scout murders. With a population of 30,000 and vast forest land in all directions, Mays County was a perfect place to run a camp. Operated by the Girl Scouts since 1928, Camp Scott was 2 miles from the town of Locust Grove and 50 miles from Tulsa Girl Scout headquarters. Counselors met their campers at the latter on June 12th. Michelle Hoffman had aged out as a camper by 1977 and would spend her 7th summer at Camp Scott as a counselor. The 15-year-old recalled how scary her own first summer was when she spotted shy Doris Milner in the crowd. Wading through parents and 130 children, she ensured the girl's mother not to worry. My first year at Camp Scott, I remember going, whoa, because it's so dark, dark, dark in those woods at night, said Counselor Michelle Hoffman. If you've never been camping in a platform tent in the deep woods, it's a little intimidating. After your first time there, you get used to it. You're just prepared it's going to be dark. After about an hour's drive, the bus turned off Highway 82 and onto Cookie Trail Road. While familiar campers jumped out to find their tents, Hoffman made sure to bring Doris to Kiowa, tent number 8 herself. It was close to both the bathrooms and the kitchen, with Milner immediately finding camaraderie inside. A few songs and innocent laughs later, Milner had found best friends in 8-year-old Lori and 9-year-old Michelle. Even Counselor Carla Wilt said that while there were 3 of the quietest kids individually, the tent was just as loud and lively as others before nightfall. Braving a storm in the tent, the trio went to bed. I'm going to interject a point right now, and we'll get back to it later, but some believe the screaming in their tent was heard, and it was them being killed. But the counselors just assumed it was screaming girls telling ghost stories or whatever, playing around, goofing around, because they could never, obviously, the first thing on their mind was not somebody's going into the camp and killing them, but that's just all details, tragic details, that might be critical in establishing an exact timeline, but we'll get to that later. While news reports at 8 p.m. varied from freak accident to foul play, authorities at the scene were already aware of the macabre truth. It was Carla Wilt herself who found the bodies, with the subsequent crime scene revealing its vicious nature to police. Farmer and Goose were beaten to death, and Milner strangled. 2 of the girls had been raped and the other sodomized. It remains unclear who suffered which, while it was glaring that one had been treated differently from the others and not stuffed into a sleeping bag. In the meantime, buses brought all other campers back to Tulsa, where parents breathed sighs of relief at 2:15 p.m. Police interviews revealed that there had been eerie noises in the night. A counselor had gone to investigate moaning sounds at 1:30 a.m. but couldn't locate the source. A camper in tent number 7 was woken half an hour later with a flashlight shone in their face. One girl heard a scream at 3 a.m. while another heard someone crying, "Mama, Mama." A nearby landowner had heard quite a bit of traffic on a road near Camp Scott between 2 and 3 a.m. Okay, so here's the thing. You have a dark, stormy night with loud and boisterous girls. Okay, so how much of these details are related to the crime, how much is not? And we're going to get back to the camper in tent number 7, who woke up with a flashlight in their face. Supposedly, this might have been a woman, and we're going to get into theories that this was not a single perpetrator, and that there possibly could have been 2 or 3 perpetrators, one of which might have been a woman. Now, some believe this is all just conflation, and for whatever reason, the counselor that shone the flashlight in the girl's face didn't want to come forward, but other accounts state that it might have been an older woman. So, again, the crying of "Mama, Mama," I mean, what could that have been? So there's a 3 a.m. scream. Someone else is crying for their mom. Now, how often does that happen? Does that happen every night? In which case, perhaps this is not related. However, there's a 3 a.m. scream, and if it really can be determined, see, how do they determine all these times exactly? Because, again, they probably didn't have cell phones on them in 1977 that they could just glance at. And even if they did, even now with cell phones, in certain extreme situations, you're not necessarily going to be glancing at your phone, so you might not necessarily know exact minutes and timelines. But continuing on here, the crime itself was covered in blood, seemingly wiped around with a mattress and towels. Footprints inside and outside the tent were found, but differed in size. Duct tape, cords, and flashlight were left behind. And that's weird in and of itself, because why would you, I mean, how hard is it to bring a flashlight with you? Unless the perpetrators were possibly disturbed by others, but we'll get into those theories later as well. While authorities found a print on the lens, they failed to identify it. Most disturbing was the notion that these murders had been planned for months, as a counselor's ransacked cabin in April yielded a note that read, "We are on a mission to kill 3 girls in tent 1, signed the killer." The killer. Singular. The camp director treated it as a joke. And that's one of, I mean, this is really tough in this case to write that off. Because how can you definitively state that's not related? So they got are they tent number 1? Did they get the tent wrong? Did they mean in a tent, in one tent, in tent 1? Regardless, it specifically states that they want to kill 3 girls. That's kind of weird. That's kind of weird. While Sheriff Glenn Weaver claimed to have found the murder weapon on June 16th, District Attorney Sid Wise, how wise is he, almost immediately denied as much. See, this is weird too, because if the sheriff is possibly involved or covering for somebody, would he announce that there was a murder weapon? Is there some kind of planting? Are there switcheroos with DNA samples? It's just kind of weird. I mean, we're going to be getting into this timeline further, but already there's so many oddities and anomalies jumping out. It's tough. I mean, this is really, really a tough case. Ultimately, police dogs located a cave 2 miles from the camp that held a flashlight battery, glasses seemingly stolen from camp, and photos of women they were able to link to a man named Gene Leroy Hart. Now, here's the thing. Ominously, the wall of a nearby cave read, quote, "The killer was here. Bye-bye, fools. 77-6-17. So 4 days after the murders. But here's the thing about this. If this is kind of a known cave or whoever, is it possible that there could have been vagrants or thieves, one or more, in that area who might have stole stuff from the camp, but they're not murderers? Again, let's not fall for these false dichotomies. Just because a cave was used by somebody doesn't mean it was used specifically, exclusively by the perpetrator. But the inscription on the cave, so I mean, that's kind of weird. Was it written in Jean Leroy Hart's handwriting? Were they able to determine that? We'll get into that further. Or was it somebody trying to frame him? Jean Leroy Hart is tried and acquitted of the murders. March 30th, 1979. Convicted of rape and kidnapping, Jean Leroy Hart had escaped Mays County Jail in 1973. Police believed the local Cherokee community had been sheltering him ever since. With the help of 40 FBI agents and $1.25 million, police tracked him down at a Cherokee cabin April 6, 1978. It had been the largest and longest manhunt in Oklahoma history. While Hart had indeed been hiding among fellow Cherokees, members of the American Indian movement argued Sheriff Weaver had been trying to find a scapegoat among their tribe to pin the murders on. Nonetheless, Hart was transported to Oklahoma State Pen and charged with 3 first-degree murders. The trial from March 19th to May 30th, 1979, saw the prosecution argue Hart's eyeglasses were stolen from the camp and that hair found on the duct tape resembled his. What do you mean resemble? Do they still not have it? Can't they DNA test that? The defense, meanwhile, claimed the glasses had been taken from Hart's previous rape victims, which Hart admitted, and that Weaver planted the rest. And regarding planting, some people believe law enforcement in certain cases protects one of their own with the planting, but we have to also keep in mind, especially in high-profile cases, law enforcement officers or sheriffs, what have you, they might plant just to get the case closed, not because they're protecting somebody, not because they know who really did it. They just want to close the damn case. With waitress Dean Boyd testifying that she'd seen a nervous man at her diner 15 miles from Camp Scott on the morning of the killings, an alternative suspect emerged. Identified as William Stevens, the man was a convicted rapist who an 11-year-old camper had even seen on Camp Scott grounds days before June 13th. And again, it doesn't state this here, but I would be curious to know if handwriting samples the witnesses that saw the note, the inscription in the cave between William Stevens and Hart, as well as any other suspects they might have had. Stevens' friend, Dwayne Peters, not only claimed that he had loaned him the flashlight found at the scene, but that Stevens admitted the killings to him in October 1977. Ultimately, however, a jury of 6 men and 6 women deliberated for 5 minutes before finding Jean Leroy Hart innocent on March 30th, 1979. He died of a heart attack on June 4th, 1979. Age 35. Wow, Mr. Hart dies of a heart attack, aged 35. It was only in 1989 that DNA testing of semen samples found at the scene showed that 3 of the 5 probes matched Hart's DNA. The Farmer and Miller families unsuccessfully sued the Magic Empire Girl Scout Council in 1985 while Farmer opened a Parents of Murdered Children chapter in Oklahoma. In the end, Camp Scott shuttered its gates and never welcomed anyone again. Now part of the pantheon of unsolved murders, the horrid crimes at Camp Scott remain pored over by amateur sleuths hoping to find the truth. So a lot more info gone over there. But it's weird though, because do they have that hair, and can they still DNA sample the hair? And again, is there more than one individual involved? All right, so let's go into the details here. GirlScoutMurders.com has some very detailed information. So let's look at the timeline here. According to this they state June 13th, 1977, sometime between 2 and 4 a.m., someone or more than one person came into the Kiowa unit, killed and sexually molested the 3 girls who were sleeping in tent number 7. The perpetrator or perpetrators carried the bodies to a location about 150 yards from their tent. The 3 girls were Michelle Goose, Doris Milner, and Lori Farmer. And I don't know how many theories adequately explain why they were carried 150 yards away from the tent. Unless they were trying to dump them somewhere in the deep woods where they wouldn't be found at all, but then why abandon, or if they were spooked off by someone else, perhaps. At 6 a.m., Carla Wilt, Camp Scott counselor in the Kiowa unit, discovers the bodies of 3 of her campers dead on the side of the trail while she is on the trail to the showers. By 7:30 a.m., several members of local law enforcement are present at the crime scene and the investigation begins. Approximately 10 a.m., Camp Scott is evacuated without telling the other campers why they are heading back home after only one night of summer camp. Charter buses return the girls to Tulsa, Oklahoma, where they are met by their families. June 13th, 1977 was the last day that Camp Scott was open. After nearly 50 years of hosting Girl Scouts, Camp Scott closed and never reopened. On June 14th, 1977, the wooden floor platform of tent number 7 is airlifted to the crime lab. I mean, that's fancy for 1977. The floor is covered in blood. The perpetrator or perpetrators appeared to have attempted to wipe up the blood using towels and mattresses. Against the wishes of investigators, it is published in the press that a tennis shoe print is found outside the tent and a different print was found inside the tent. And this is another critical piece of information. I mean, what other theories are there that a counselor actually went into the tent and was shocked and then went out and didn't want to admit that for whatever reason? Because, I mean, who knows? I mean, there could be an explanation that does not involve the second print being an individual directly involved in the murders. But that's definitely a major, major issue that would need to be rectified for a suitable explanation of the crime. Also, is it weird that the perpetrator or perpetrators even attempted to wipe up the blood and mattresses? I mean, what were they? Did they really think they could wipe up all the blood? I mean, that doesn't make a lot of sense either. June 15th, 77, Sid Wise, Mays County DA, is publicly outraged that the press published the info about the shoe prints. A man is arrested 7 miles north of Camp Scott. He is living in his car. He is questioned by police and then released. Interesting. No name is given here. The investigation turns to a ranch just west of Camp Scott, owned by Tulsan Jack Schroff. Schroff had items stolen from his cabin, which may have a connection to the murders. It is announced that highly trained tracking dogs will be coming into the area from Pennsylvania. The press nicknames these dogs the Wonder Dogs. For the first time, the name of Jean Leroy Hart is mentioned as a possible suspect. Hart escaped from the Mays County Jail 4 years prior to the murders and has been on the loose ever since. Officials further informed the press that in addition to the shoe prints, they have found fingerprints on the bodies, a flashlight, a piece of cord, and duct tape as evidence. June 16th, 77, the Wonder Dogs arrived from Pennsylvania. It is determined that the killer or killers must have passed by the counselor's tent in order to get to tent 8. Curious. Eyeglasses and an eyeglasses case are found. These glasses and the case belong to campers in Kiowa unit and to one of the counselors. It doesn't state exactly where they were found. That's weird. Huh. That's kind of weird. The medical examiner announces on June 16th that the 3 girls were not raped. Huh. June 17th, 1977, Jack Schroff, the nearby ranch owner whose house near Camp Scott had been burglarized the week before camp began, passes a lie detector test. Due to the way the article ran in the Tulsa Tribune and its continuation on another page, the article led some readers to believe that Schroff was a suspect. Schroff received harassing phone calls and threats and had to be hospitalized. What? Investigators working the case announced that there are 3 fingerprints on the girls' bodies. Going back to Schroff for a second, though, would this random guy be that dumb to commit this crime with his ranch right next to the camp? I mean, I don't know, maybe if he's totally insane, but I mean, I don't know if that would be the first choice there, especially if he had lived there for a long time and the summer camp is ongoing. So it seems kind of weird for him to have perpetrated the crime. June 18th, 77, Sheriff Pete Weaver announces that a murder weapon has been found. DA Sid Wise and agents of the OSBI tell the press that they have no idea what Sheriff Weaver is talking about. UPI reports that the murder weapon is a crowbar and that there are several good fingerprints on the crowbar. Does not state here where the crowbar was found or why they connected it. The tracking dogs lead investigators to some ponds on Schroff's property. The ponds are drug, but nothing is found. Yeah, I mean, and again, what exactly were the tracking dogs tracking? And it's tough. It's tough to make heads or tails of this. At an unknown point between June 16th and 18th, it is rumored that a local Cherokee medicine man has placed a curse on the tracking dogs, and they will all die soon. What? Later in the day on the 18th of June, one of the dogs dies from heat prostration. What? So what is this unknown point about the medicine man curse? Is this just a rumor or can it be verified? That's kind of weird, because how often do tracking dogs just die? That's kind of weird. Okay, the following day, June 19th, 1977, the tracking dog's owner says that they have found some solid evidence and that there will be a break in the case very soon. Sid Wise tells the press that there are no suspects as of yet in the case. Sheriff Weaver announced that there is one suspect in the case. The Oklahoma State Bureau of Investigation, the OSBI, says there are 3 suspects in the case. Wow. So a lot of conflicting information from various sources, from various government sources here. Sid Wise corrects the record, reporting that Sheriff Weaver was incorrect when he announced that he had found a possible murder weapon. June 20th, in a complete reversal from the previous day's announcements, DA Wise publicly states that there are, quote, several suspects in the case and a mountain of evidence, end quote. A mountain of evidence. It is also announced that they do have fingerprints on one of the bodies. One of the 2 wonder dogs, Harris, without explanation, ran out into heavy traffic and was struck and killed by a car. The dog was valued between $10,000 and $20,000. So here's the thing. So within 2 days of this alleged curse, 2 dogs are already dead. I mean, this is kind of weird. June 21st, 1977, Oklahoma Governor David Boren offers the help of the National Guard in the manhunt. Another suspect is added to the list. Law enforcement identifies him only as Mike. He was apparently a camper, camping alone in the area near Camp Scott. He was also believed to have stolen a hatchet and some supplies from a nearby Boy Scout camp, Camp Garland. And we'll be getting into Camp Garland later for some other theories, some of which are also quite dark. Some believe that Boy Scouts went into the camp and did this deed, and that there was some kind of cover-up and play after the fact, but let's just continue with the timeline here. June 22nd, 1977, officials announced that 2 photographs were found with 3 women pictured in them. Some officials tell the press that the photos were found near the bodies. Other officials are telling other press outlets that the photos were found in a cave about 2 miles from Camp Scott. Sid Wise announces a media blackout because he feels the press is portraying the investigators as being involved in infighting. Also on this day, the forensic experts say that there is only one good fingerprint on one of the bodies. The other prints are smudged. The good fingerprint is picture perfect according to one source. June 23rd, 77, officials disclosed that the 2 photographs which were found were developed by Jean Leroy Hart while he was working in the photo lab at Granite Reformatory. A man believed to be Gene Hart is reportedly spotted near Camp Scott. This report launches a full-scale search for the suspect. So on June 23rd, 77, Hart is allegedly spotted near the camp. Weird. June 24th, 77, 200 members of law enforcement and 400 volunteers surround a 4-mile area near Camp Scott. The volunteers were not supposed to have guns, but many did anyway. Police arrested some volunteers for being drunk. A few volunteers were arrested for possession of marijuana. Members of the American Indian Movement arrive in order to monitor this posse. June 26, 77, most all of the 200 lawmen who have come to the area to assist in the manhunt leave on this day. Wow, this is weird. So there's also a report here. This is from newspaper article June 28, 1977. Heat sensing devices used in the search. So apparently there were heat-seeking instruments in 1977. Interesting. Wow. Okay. So they blamed the lack of success on the instruments on the weather. June 28th, Sheriff Weaver says that there will soon be a $14,000 reward offered in the case. June 29th, the FBI moves 40 agents into the area to help in the investigation. June 30th, 77, Gene Hart's mother, Ella Mae Buckskin, tells the press that she is regularly being harassed and that Sheriff Weaver planted the photograph to be found to implicate her son. According to Mrs. Buckskin, Weaver is doing this because of growing pressure to have a suspect. The FBI makes the claim that they have proof that Hart was in the area during the murders. They don't really state what this proof is. July 1st, 77. Law enforcement leaves Camp Scott, saying that all evidence from the camp area has been gathered. July 5th, a man matching Hart's description is spotted in the search area. The tracking dogs are brought in quickly to try and track down the person. Almost as soon as the dogs pick up on the scent, they suddenly lose it. This is all really strange. And why? So Hart continues to be spotted in the area? Is this a case of a guilty perpetrator coming back to the scene of the crime? Or is this a case of someone who thinks they might be implicated, but why would they, either way, why would they come that close to the scene of the crime? It's weird. July 6th, Oklahoma State Medical Examiner releases the autopsy on the 3 victims. OSBI Director Sheriff Laird calls a press conference and announces that there are no fingerprints on the girls' bodies. In his press release, he curiously says, quote, "What was thought to be fingerprints are not fingerprints," end quote. And he elaborated no further on the topic. He concludes the press conference with another rather unusual statement, quote, "I would say with certainty that Hart is guilty because I would not say with certainty that any person who has not yet been tried were guilty but we do have a great deal of evidence in this case that points to his guilt, end quote. Okay, that doesn't make a lot of sense. But it's weird because before they were saying there's picture perfect fingerprints. So this smells of a cover up because unless we believe that all these people are just complete incompetents, like they have no competency, they don't know what a fingerprint is. Because there's multiple reports of fingerprints and then later reports of picture perfect fingerprints. So not just fingerprints, but one print being picture perfect. The others maybe not perfect. So does this smell of a cover-up? Did the fingerprint match someone who they didn't want it to match? I mean, this is another one of these wrinkles that's just, it's hard to ignore. The fingerprint flip-flopping by law enforcement. Just really weird. July 29th, 77, a private security team looking after Camp Scott sees what they think is a person in the woods. After coming back from investigating, they find a pair of Denise Milner's shoes and socks wet in a bag on the steps of the camp director's house. Okay, so we are firmly in mind shock territory. I mean, this doesn't make any sense. And there's even a Tulsa Tribune article here. Shoes mysteriously appear at Scout death scene. Why would Denise Milner's shoes and socks be put in a bag on the steps of the camp director's house? Because, I mean, if these are at the police crime lab, I mean, that's one thing, but apparently if they were never found in the first place, were they brought there? I mean, that doesn't really... Wow, that doesn't make any sense. We're going to have to come back to that because that's another one of these wrinkles in the case that doesn't make any sense at all. August 3rd, Tulsa World newspaper prints front page plea from Oklahoma Governor David Boren. Boren said, "I will use the authority of the governor's office and will take any steps necessary to assure his security and a fair trial if he will give himself up." September 22nd. So July 29th, the shoes and socks mysteriously appear. That's like the last major evidence-based point. Now we're on September 22nd. Two of the families of the victims file a $3 million lawsuit against Magic Empire Girl Scout Council. October 1st, $5,000 reward offered for info leading to the arrest of Gene Hart. The reward is made available by a group of prior residents calling themselves Drug Awareness Incorporated. Okay, interesting. October 10th, Mays County Sheriff Pete Weaver announces to the press that he is confident that Gene Hart is still in the area and that he will be apprehended. He told the press, "We'll stay with it until we do catch Hart. It's investigate day and night." December 30th, 1977, two state law enforcement agencies report that combined they have spent in excess of $138,000 in the manhunt for Hart. Combined, the OSBI has spent $100,000 and the Department of Public Safety $38,000. Not included in the figure were the expenses for the National Guard and the cost to Mays County. A spokesperson for Governor Boren says that the state went all out and that expense was never an option. January 28th, 78, the FBI releases some composite sketches of Gene Hart along with some aliases he is believed to have used. The sketches portray him with long hair and wearing glasses. Okay, then nothing until April 6th, 1978, 4:15 p.m., a team of 8 OSBI agents, including Mike Wilkerson, Harvey Pratt, Jack Lay, Larry Bowles, Bud Owsley, Kerry Thurman, Don Sharp, and Roger Crisco, storm a home in a remote area of the southeast corner of Cherokee County near Bunch, Oklahoma. The residence belonged to a man named Sam Pigeon and was located about 45 miles from Camp Scott. Hart is arrested without incident. He is transported directly to the Oklahoma State Penitentiary at McAllister. There are some photos from the arrest here. Remembering that Hart had tried on eyeglasses of the 2 Tulsa women he raped in 1966, and remembering that eyeglasses were stolen and some discarded from the tents in the Keola unit, it was noticed by all of the arresting officers that Hart was wearing women's eyeglasses. The state of Oklahoma versus Gene Leroy Hart.
On March 19, 1979, the trial of the state of Oklahoma versus Jean Leroy Hart began with its first eyewitness taking the stand. The trial would last until May 30th, 79. Unfortunately, there is no actual trial transcript for this case. By Oklahoma statute, when a person is acquitted of a crime, no trial transcript is retained by the court clerk. I mean, it's got to exist, though, right? On the website here, they do have a bunch of articles, newspaper articles. I mean, I'm just going to go over one article here from March 26, 1979. 2 chemists challenge evidence in trial over Girl Scout slayings. 2 chemists testifying for the defense today disputed the state's evidence against Jean Leroy Hart, who was accused of murdering 3 Girl Scouts in 1977. The 2 witnesses suggested that some of the chemical tests bordered on guesswork. John T. Wilson, chief forensic chemist for the Kansas City Police Department's Regional Crime Laboratory, told jurors that tests conducted on hair, blood, and semen samples taken from Mr. Hart were unreliable. Herbert Maxey, a chemist who formerly analyzed hair and semen samples for state law enforcement agencies, said the tests could show similarities, but that's as far as it goes. So basically, I mean, these experienced chemists are calling into question the veracity of the nature of the so-called matches. You know what's weird, though? So regarding the witness here, waitress in Chateau, she testified that on June 13th, she saw convicted rapist William Stevens in her restaurant, acting shaken and with blood on his boots. See, that's kind of weird, though. If he really did kill people, he goes into a restaurant. Does that sound like a made-up story and a planted witness? I mean, I don't know. That's kind of weird. That's kind of weird. There's also a photo here of Hart with his hands on his face, supposedly crying after the reaction of not guilty. Make of that what you will. So there's a very interesting part of the website here, the unexplained. And I mean, this is definitely MINDSHOCK territory. So let's go over this here. There are some elements to this case that defy logic and defy the normal rational process of a modern investigation. This is what the author Charles Sasser refers to as the lore of this particular case. For most Oklahomans, especially those who live in the larger cities like nearby Tulsa, as well as Oklahoma City, Lawton, Bartlesville, and most Oklahomans who live in the western half of the state, the very idea that Indian medicine men are still an active part of the native people's lives is a completely foreign idea. The idea that there are native peoples within the borders of the state of Oklahoma who have so isolated themselves from the modern world that they barely speak English and are much more comfortable in the Native American tongue is also something unfathomable to most Oklahomans. An entire website or even an entire book could be written strictly about some of the bizarre occurrences that happened before, during, and after the murders of these 3 Girl Scouts. This site will only attempt to discuss a few of them. Wherever and however possible, I will try to document the sources for the information given in this section. It must be noted, however, that much of the evidence of these unexplained events remains anecdotal, and you will either choose to believe them or you will choose not to believe them. Orientation. The pages below come from Counselor Carla Wilt's testimony at the preliminary hearing. Miss Wilhit was the first person to discover the bodies of the 3 slain girls. She and another counselor were called as witnesses on the first day of the preliminary hearing. Here, Story recounts an event that occurred the week before the fateful week of summer camp began. Miss Wilt and the other counselors were at Camp Scott for an orientation session. There, she had one of these unexplainable events occur to her personally. Under oath, she recounts the events of one night during the week before June 13th. So here, the pages here. Who has the keys for those buildings? Ben. Does the camp counselor have keys? I don't know. Back to the security class. During orientation week, did they tell you anything about the security around the building? Around which building? Any of them? Camp buildings. Any building at Camp Scott. At Camp Scott. Her response, No, we were just told, mostly it was more camp safety because we'd never really had any problems with anybody. We have a few prowlers before, the previous years, and nothing has ever been taken or destroyed, and then it was in passing that we were told, if we did see any prowlers or any people in campgrounds, that we were supposed to notify them that it was camp property and for them to leave. Carla, have you ever seen a prowler at Camp Scott? I couldn't call them prowlers, but I've seen people drive through and ask directions to the camp director's office, and I just tell them where the office was or tell them they weren't allowed on the property. They would have to turn around and go back. Did anything ever happen to you during the orientation week which was unusual? Well, there was. I hurt my back lifting sailboats. What happened after you hurt your back? Well, there was this stuff, camp out down at the Cedar Lodge. Where is the Cedar Lodge located, Carla? Well, you go back down the road a piece, and there is a sign that says Cedar Lodge. Which way? Down the Cookie Trail east? Down the Cookie Trail north. Yes. Mr. Wise interjects here. If it please the court, I'm going to object to this line of questioning unless we can establish a date and time with some relevancy to this case. The court sustained. Have her establish when it happened. Mr. Isaacs, I thought we were talking about the orientation week, Judge. Do you recall what day during the orientation you hurt your back, Carla? Probably Wednesday or Thursday. If it pleases the court, we would inquire about the orientation week of 77 or what year. Do you want to ask her that, Mr. Isaacs? Miss Wilt, which orientation week are we talking about? 1977. If you can recall, what day of the week are we talking about, Wednesday or Thursday? About what time of day did you hurt your back? Afternoon. After you hurt your back, did you go down to Cedar Lodge? I eventually did. They gave me some Tylenol with codeine, and that knocked me out for the afternoon, but I was up and went to Cedar Lodge to eat, but I planned to sleep in the staff house on the floor because I couldn't sleep on the floor of one of the tents, and I didn't want to be up in the infirmary by myself, and if I slept in the staff house, I would be closer to some of the units. And so anyway, question, what happened that night when you were in the staff house? I heard a noise. I heard noise behind the staff house on the screen. What did it sound like, Carla? It was just a scratch, like somebody rubbing up against it. And I figured there was somebody behind there, like a camper or something, and they were going to, last night's surprise. Could you tell if the person was man or beast? It sounded like a person, and so I said, who's there? And nobody answered, but I heard steps walking away, and so I put on my glasses, and I just laid there and listened, and I heard, some more steps, so I got up and looked out, looked out the front window because I thought it might have been Sally, our camp dog. And here she comes. Sally comes across from over the Woodward's house. Who does Sally belong to? The camp. What did Sally do when she came running across the yard? She started barking and growling. Did you ever see what she was barking or growling at? No. Did you hear anything else? Not after that. I just grabbed my blanket while she was starting to chase whatever it was, and I ran across and got Dee Elder because I knew she was in the Quapaw unit. And I got her and a few other people, and they came in and sat with me until I fell asleep, and then Jody Davis came in the house and the rest of the night. Did you tell anybody else about the incident where you heard the noise outside of the staff house? I don't remember, just Dee and whoever else was there at the time. Did anything unusual other than that happen during the orientation week? No. How about the tent flap? Did you see that? The one with the 6-inch tear in it? Yes, ma'am. Yes, I saw that. Do you know what caused it? No. Does weather ever cause a 6-inch tear in a tent flap? It could, and we don't know whether weather caused it or somebody cut it, do we? Mr. Wise, if it pleases the court, we would object. She's asked and answered the question. Objection sustained. Okay. So apparently there's some kind of 6-inch tear in a tent as well. Huh. So this could have been a stalker or a prowler or somebody, or it could have been nothing. I mean, that's not really that definitive there. Alright, so let's move on to the shoes. The magical shoes mysteriously reappearing at the death scene. So this article, quite curious, the Tulsa Tribune, July 29th, 1977. Shoes mysteriously appear at Scout death scene by Jack Weimer. Locust Grove. A pair of tennis shoes with the handwritten name of slain Girl Scout Denise Milner on them was found early Thursday on the front steps of the building used as a command post at Camp Scott, where she and 2 other scouts were killed June 13th. The shoes were found by security guards as they returned from a search of nearby woods called after one man reported seeing the silhouette of a man. They weren't there an hour before, said R.C. Cowherd, owner of the Guardian security company hired to guard the camp. Whoever is out there must have come back and put them there. The bodies of the Milner girl, 10, Lori Lee Farmer, 9, both of Tulsa, and Michelle Goose, 8, of Broken Arrow, were found beaten and sexually molested about 150 yards from their tents their second morning at Camp Scott. Jean Leroy Hart, a 33-year-old escaped rapist from Locust Grove, has been charged in the killings, but law enforcement officers say there is no evidence that the person in the woods near the camp is Hart or is connected with the killing. The bizarre shoe development has led officers to place more credibility in the theory that someone, possibly the scout killer, is stalking the grounds near the murder scene. 3 nights this week, guards have reported seeing a person in the woods near the camp. Tracking dogs appeared to find a hot trail each night, but lost it each time. No one has been found. Thin strands of thread tied by investigators between trees near the murder scene have been found broken, and footprints have been found in the sand spread across several trails there. Okay, so to all the coincidence theorists who think that people are just mistaken or seeing things that aren't there, I mean, they actually tied thread between trees to see if people would be stomping around in there. That's weird. And then the footprints as well. This is actually really bizarre. Ted Limpke, Oklahoma State Bureau of Investigation agent in charge of the investigation, said this morning he had not seen the shoes and could not speculate whether the shoes belonged to the Milner girl or had been placed there as a prank. If it is a joke, it's a very unfunny joke, Limpke said. Asked if OSBI agents might have left the shoes at the campsite, Limpke responded, "We aren't missing any evidence." The shoes, which were found with a pair of socks in a heavy plastic bag, were picked up by OSBI agents Thursday afternoon and taken to the state crime lab for testing. Mays County Sheriff Pete Weaver suggested the shoes may have been used to scent the tracking dogs brought into the case and were left by OSBI agents when they left the camp. Really? They never returned them, but the guy said they weren't missing any evidence. And did they have those in evidence in the first place? Why are none of these questions answered? Tom Kennedy, Deputy Director of the OSBI, said today 2 pairs of shoes with Denise Milner's name on them are in the evidence files at the Oklahoma City office of the crime. Any shoes that might have been found Thursday were not there the day we originally investigated the case. I'm sure we never have seen these shoes before. They are not part of our evidence, Kennedy said. What? Okay, so these were not used to track? This is really weird. Milner said today she sent 2 pairs of shoes with her daughter to camp, but said she was told one of the pairs was missing. Okay, the plot thickens. When we got her stuff back, we were missing a pair of tennis shoes, 2 pairs of socks, a blue blanket with a monogram, and 2 cans of insect repellent. The OSBI, however, claims to have both pairs of shoes in the Oklahoma City laboratory. Mrs. Milner said she has no idea where the 3rd pair of shoes might have come from. Okay, so they had 2 in evidence, and this is not part of the 2. Mrs. Milner said 1 pair of socks missing from her daughter's belongings was pink and the other pair was yellow. Weaver said the shoes are merely one unexplicable incident that indicates that someone is walking around the camp area day and night. The guards have found doors standing wide open that they closed and bolted just 30 minutes before, Weaver said. It's just getting spooky up there. Officer said whoever put the shoes in the camp risked getting killed Thursday morning. He might have been shot, one officer said, but even if he was just captured unharmed, we would have a heck of a lot of explaining to do about the murders and where he got those shoes. OSBI agents said they found at least one pair of shoes with the Milner girl's name on them the day the bodies were found and took them, with other evidence from the slaying scene to the crime laboratory in Oklahoma City. Agents now are trying to determine if the Milner girl had 2 pairs of tennis shoes with her at the camp. But the mother just said she did. She sent 2. Cowherd, who has spent much of the past 3 weeks guarding the camp himself, said the shoes were in a bag that was not an OSBI evidence bag. He said both the shoes and socks were wet. We didn't take the shoes out of the bag yesterday, but my daughter was there and she's a former Girl Scout. She said campers usually write their name on the inside of their shoes, and when she pressed the plastic against the shoes, she could read the name, Cowherd said. Officers have requested that all persons stay away from the camp. Some of those guys, officers and guards, are a little goosey. Someone could get hurt walking around up there, one officer said. Cowherd said he will step up the manpower from his organization, and Weaver said deputies will spend the next several nights at the camp. Whoever it is out there must want to get caught or killed, Cowherd said, because he's all over the place. Based on the tracking dog's behavior, Cowherd said the person walking around the camp has walked in all directions through heavy brush and avoided established trails. Cowherd said a dog, which apparently had been clubbed during a massive search of the woods 3 weeks after the murders, has acted strangely during this week's searches. He gets excited when they first get on the trail, and then he goes after it, but when they get real close and the trail gets real hot, he stops and quits while the others go on tracking. He might be remembering something. Weaver said even though he has no evidence that the person in the woods is the killer, he wants to catch whoever it is. The guy out there, killer or not, is crazy and we want him, Weaver said, and he is hampering the efforts of law enforcement. We've got a hell of a job on our hands without someone messing around with us. You know what's weird though? So these guards are locking and bolting doors, so can these doors be opened without a key? But continuing on the website here, this is not where hints of supernatural involvement begin, but it is the point where people who are unassociated with the case, the security guards, are presented with such a scenario. After having seen what they thought was the silhouette of a man out in the woods, they went to investigate. As they returned, they found in a sealed plastic bag a pair of shoes with the name Doris Milner written inside of them. Also in the bag were a pair of pink socks. Both items were wet, and the bag was not an OSBI evidence bag. The stairs were ones that the security team frequently used, so the bag was placed on the steps in the hour that the guards were out investigating what they saw in the woods. The tracking dogs have been called in at other times when the guards believed they had seen a man in the woods lurking around the camp. The dogs would find the scent, take off running, and then would usually end up in a field outside Camp Scott, but near the Kiowa unit. The dogs on more than one occasion would simply lose the scent, start turning in circles, looking upward, as if the scent or the person they were chasing had simply ascended upwards and disappeared. The security team began tying thin threads between trees where they would see the man walking in the woods, and the next day those threads would be broken. Wow, this is all really, really bizarre. I mean, the other thing is, so supposedly none of this info is ever brought up ever again. Were those shoes tested in the DNA in the lab? Does the DNA on the shoes, can they confirm that they were Doris Milner's shoes? Would that make it 3 pairs of shoes? Or were they lying that they had 2 pairs of shoes already, trying not to look bad? Was one of them really stolen from the lab and then put back, even though it's not an evidence bag? If someone did steal it from an evidence bag, it's not that hard to put it in a different bag. So what really happened with the shoes here? I mean, I don't know why this is not a primary point of the investigation, because, I mean, can anyone recall any other case like this? I mean, this is bizarre. Continuing on here, Cookson Hills. The Cookson Hills are in the eastern part of Oklahoma. They are an extension of the Boston Mountains of Arkansas to the east and the southwestern margin of the Ozark Plateau. They lie generally between Stillwell, Oklahoma, Sallisaw, Oklahoma, and Tahlequah, Oklahoma. The area became part of the Cherokee Nation in the early 1800s until 1907 when Oklahoma became a state. The region is a rugged, dissected plateau with numerous peaks and ridges of 1,500 feet or higher. The Cooksons are drained by tributaries of the Arkansas River. The Depression-era bank robber Charles Arthur Pretty Boy Floyd, Rufus Buck, the Dalton Gang, the Doolins, and the James Brothers, Bell Star, Cherokee Bill, Wilbur Underhill, and more recently fugitive Gene Leroy Hart. Without actually taking someone into the Cookson Hills region of northeast Oklahoma, it would be very difficult to explain exactly how and why these legendary outlaws and fugitives would choose the Cookson Hills as their sanctuary from the law. The area where Camp Scott was located is just north of the confluence of Snake Creek and Spring Creek. The main part of the camp sits on top of a ridge that overlooks that valley cut by Snake Creek far below. To see the place today that for nearly 50 years served as a haven for Girl Scouts is not only slightly eerie, but it is also sad. The former camp area is only minimally maintained by the current owners. Because of this, one has the opportunity to experience what these hills had to offer so many fugitives over the past 150 years. The isolation, the solitude, and the disorientation that come very quickly once you step away from any path off into the woods. You realize instantly that you lose your sense of where you came from. You realize how limited your visibility is in any direction because of the thick trees and dense underbrush. When the wind blows, it is all too easy to believe you saw something or someone moving through the woods. You then become aware of the fact that someone could be standing 7 or 8 feet away from you and you would not be able to see them. I mean, are they insinuating here that there's just some kind of supernatural element to this area? So the theories that there was more than one individual involved this goes back to articles as early as June 21st, 1977. So within weeks here. Man questioned in Scout murders. One man was questioned Wednesday in the sex murders of 3 young Girl Scouts, but authorities said the importance of the interrogation was being blown way out of proportion. 3 highway patrolmen and a deputy sheriff went to Miami, Oklahoma, about 60 miles from here, from Locust Grove, to question a man arrested on a complaint of public drunkenness. The man was later returned to his cell. Mays County DA Sid Wise said that the questioning was not unusual, that officers were talking to many people in the northeastern Oklahoma area. Another article here, June 27th, 1977, may be second suspect in Girl Scout murders. A leader in the investigation of the 2-week-old slaying of 3 Girl Scouts said Sunday officials have not ruled out another suspect. Mays County DA Sid Wise would not give details on any other suspects or name them. He said officers were still searching for Gene Leroy Hart, who was charged in the death. 4 SWAT teams from the Highway Patrol and the FBI searched a section of hill country about 3 miles long and a half-mile wide Sunday for evidence that might indicate Hart was hiding there. Authorities have said they believe Hart, a Cherokee Indian born in the area, has been hiding there since his escape from jail 4 years ago. Hart fled from the Mays County Jail at nearby Pryor in April '73. He had been brought to the jail from the McAllister prison, where he was serving a 140-year sentence for rape and kidnapping to appear as a witness in another trial. Most of our men are back in, and we have nothing so far. Lieutenant Kenneth Van Hoy, Highway Patrol Information Officer, said Sunday afternoon. It's been about the same as yesterday. We really have nothing very productive to report. He said that the undergrowth was so dense, a man could be 2 to 3 feet from searchers and still be hidden. Roving patrols keep watch at night over the tree and brush-covered rolling hills near Camp Scott, where Lori Farmer, 8, Michelle Goose, 9, and Doris Denise Farmer, 10, were found murdered and sexually assaulted June 13th, Van Hoy said. Van Hoy said the search would continue until it was determined Hart was not in the area. Another article here, other suspects possible in Scout murder case, June 27th. At least one person besides fugitive Gene Leroy Hart is being considered a possible suspect in the slayings of 3 Girl Scouts, sources close to the investigation say. Another article here from April 19th, 1979, 2 years later. Daily Oklahoman. Fellow inmate relates Stevens' story of killing Girl Scouts, OSBI report says, by Judy Fawcett. Saying he first studied Camp Scott as he once studied an enemy camp in Vietnam, Kansas convict William Alton Stevens allegedly told a friend he selected a tent most isolated from the rest before killing the 3 Girl Scouts inside, according to a statement contained in an Oklahoma State Bureau of Investigation's report. The report, dated January 6, details a January 3rd interview by OSBI agents Larry Bowles and Tom Puckett with Dwayne Peters at a Kansas prison, where Peters and Stevens are serving life sentences for the rape, robbery, and kidnapping of a Garden City schoolteacher. 3 days later, the agents also interviewed Stevens at the prison and quoted him as denying both the slayings and the alleged confession. I mean, how could he deny the... Wait, what? Oh, well, I guess... Well, if he's making up the confession, then he's automatically denying the slayings. Unless the slayings... Okay, yeah, that doesn't make any sense. Attorneys for Gene L. Hart said Stevens was the actual slayer of the 3 Girl Scouts killed June 13, 1977, in the successful defense of Hart last month. Peters is quoted as telling the agents that Stevens admitted slaying the Scouts while the 2 men were driving around in Stevens' car near Okmulgee Lake in October of 1977, drinking beer and smoking marijuana. Still quoting Peters, the report states Stevens further stated that he had been working on an oil drilling rig near the area of Camp Scott, and having been reared in that area, knew that the Girl Scouts would be coming to Camp Scott and the date they would arrive. Stevens allegedly surveyed the Camp Scott area as he said he once did an enemy camp in Vietnam, selecting a tent most isolated from the rest, the report states. Stevens didn't go into minute detail with Peters of the actual killings, but did say he covered the lens of a flashlight with strips of tape and cut a small hole in the tape so a small amount of light would be emitted. He entered a tent and then showed Peters how he placed his hand over one of the girls' mouths to silence her after she awoke, but never mentioned the use of any weapon, nor did he say where or how the Girl Scouts were actually killed or what was done with their bodies. The OSBI report quotes Peters as saying he refused to believe Stevens until he saw him abduct a woman, beat, and rape her. Peters told the agent Stevens had borrowed a flashlight from Mrs. Joyce Payne shortly before the Girl Scouts were killed, and described it as a 2-cell silver flashlight. He also drew agents a picture of it, the report states. The flashlight Mrs. Payne identified during her testimony at Hart's trial as being the one she loaned to Stevens is a red plastic lantern-type light. Stevens, a former resident of Seminole and Okmulgee counties, told agents he was unfamiliar with the Camp Scott area, had never worked in an oil drilling rig in the area, and never owned a flashlight like the one found at the camp, and had never heard of Camp Scott before hearing about the killing. I mean, couldn't that be verified, though? I mean, another point that I didn't bring up earlier, whoever's stalking the camp, if it really is a Native American, I mean, they're renowned for their tracking. Would they really be tripping over threads in the woods or leaving footprints? I mean, I don't know. Again, not necessarily obviously not all Native Americans, particularly in 1977, would be good trackers, but just in general, I mean, I don't know. There's just, there's a lot of problems here. Here's another interesting article from the Daily Times, June 12th, 1996. So almost 20 years later, specific grand jury petition to be filed. Ted LaTurner said today he planned to file an ascended grand jury petition which is so specific it will name the names of the 2 men he alleges were in the death tent and directly responsible for the murder of 3 Girl Scouts at Camp Scott 19 years ago. And apparently Judge opposes this. Judge James Goodpaster is not in favor of a grand jury. Wow, that's kind of messed up, because a jury took less than 5 minutes to acquit Jean Leroy Hart. LaTurner claims to have an eyewitness who was in the death tent with 2 other persons, one in prison now, the other who died in prison later, who were directly involved in the murders. LeTurner claims the eyewitness told his story to law enforcement when the initial investigation was conducted, but that law enforcement only wanted to hear about Jean Leroy Hart. That's really messed up. That's really messed up. And also allegations of refusing further interviews, like in terms of the investigation. Here's another article, July 8th, 2002, where the names are named. So, in addition to Jean Leroy Hart, the names are revealed here. We have Sonny James, Frank Justice, and Bill Stevens. Bill Stevens, of course, we did mention. So this article here, Countyans wanted grand jury in 1996 from the newspaper called The Paper, July 8, 2002. LeTurner's petition named 3 possible suspects in 77 Girl Scout murders. Nearly 20 years after the unsolved murder of 3 Girl Scouts at Camp Scott, hundreds of Mays Countyans signed petitions calling for a grand jury to further investigate the crime. Locals, 20 names per sheet with sheets stacked an inch high, signed petitions in June 96 to inquire into the conduct of the investigation of the homicide of 3 Girl Scouts on June 13, 1977, and determine the identity of perpetrators of the homicide. Perpetrators already there, not perpetrator, but perpetrators. But the grand jury was never called. The grand jury petition's champion, Ted LeTurner, who was hired by former Sheriff Paul Smith to investigate the Girl Scout murders and became obsessed as a private investigator with bringing to justice the killer or killers, left town and was not heard of again until now. In the grand jury petition, LeTurner named names of suspects other than Jean Leroy Hart, who has been the only man officially charged with the crimes. Hart, however, was found not guilty in March 1979 by a Mays County jury that was not convinced by the evidence presented by the prosecution. LeTurner's first petition, filed June 5, 96, did not name names of suspects, and it was tossed out by District Judge James Goodpaster as vague, ambiguous, and speculative. A week later, LeTurner filed another petition calling for the grand jury and named the names of Jack Sonny James Jr., Frank Justice, and Bill Stevens as possible suspects in the Girl Scout murders. Sonny James is in prison on drug charges and earlier served time in prison in connection with the murder of a former friend, Freddie Rogers. You gotta love these names. Bill Stevens committed suicide in 1984 while serving time in the Kansas State Penitentiary on charges of rape, robbery, and kidnapping. Frank Justice, James's uncle, also is deceased. An eyewitness, the same unnamed eyewitness whose story has been revealed in earlier editions of The Paper concerning the Girl Scout murders, reportedly saw James, Justice, and 2 men he believed to be Stevens and Hart inside one of the tents at Camp Scott on the night of the murders. Wow. This person said there were 4 perpetrators. In July 96, LeTurner decided to postpone until after the November general election his efforts to call for a grand jury after receiving a letter from Judge Goodpaster. Goodpaster advised LeTurner state law restricts impaneling a grand jury 30 days prior to any primary runoff, and general election days, and 10 days after any such election day. Why? Since Mays County voters would be going to the polls for an August 27th primary, September 17th primary runoff, and November 5th general election, LeTurner put the grand jury petition on hold so the grand jury would not be rushed or compromised. Come on now, justice delayed is justice denied. LeTurner refiled the grand jury petition in November 96 and was going to be given 45 days to collect a minimum of 500 signatures. From interest shown in June, 500 signatures would have been easy to obtain. However, the second petition drive never started because LeTurner left town, left state, and left reality. What? Without LeTurner to lead the charge, the grand jury petition died. Seriously, nobody else could take over the petition? I mean, I'm assuming these files were not only held by him, but that's kind of weird. So he left town forever and never came back. What happened to him? Is he dead? This is really weird. This is really weird. What else is interesting is that Hart did have a history of robberies. Some of those robberies included Tulsa police officers. So perhaps this is why they really wanted to get him. I don't know. Weird. So on to some of the theories on Reddit, Unresolved Mysteries. There's a couple of threads on this case. One theory here is I always wondered whether they were taken from the tent one by one. If they were, logically the perfect person to do this without arousing suspicion would be a counselor or a camp employee. Other people also posted, I'm surprised I don't see more people mentioning this. I'm convinced someone from the camp was involved. Another post, I doubt it was a counselor, but I was wondering if there could be a woman involved. It might be the way the girls were kept quiet, a woman posing as a counselor at night or something. Another post here regarding who is zipped up, who is not. Side note, I believe the camp counselor Carla discovered Denise's body on top of her sleeping bag. She didn't unzip the sleeping bags. It wasn't until others arrived that they discovered that Lori and Michelle were zipped up in the other two sleeping bags. So that's kind of weird. The other thing, in terms of looking at layout, so they were relatively far from the counselor's tent. However, they weren't that far from the next tent. So, and the next two tents even. But you would think the tent right next to theirs, something would have been heard. And there was a report, I believe it was from either the next tent over or possibly one or two other tents over, that someone did enter the tent and flashed a flashlight around. The other thing, logistically, apparently there were 4 campers in all the tents except the girls that were murdered tent, which is also weird because the note that was found the week prior stating that they were going to kill 3. But if the standard practice is to have 4 to a tent, how did they even know there was going to be a tent with only 3? Is that a coincidence? I don't know if they've ever released official statements from the reports, but on talkmurderwithme.com, on a write-up they have here on the Oklahoma Girl Scout murders, November 30th, 2018. So this is the second night, but it says here, during the first night, there were unsettling noises coming from within the trees. They were described by camp counselors as something like a low croaking sound similar to a bullfrog. There were also strange lights amongst the trees. Camp counselors were said to have flashed their flashlights at the mysterious light in the woods, and it would disappear, only to reappear once they stopped flashing the flashlights. I mean, that is spooky stuff right there. I mean, is this the same night? Is this the night of? Okay, wow, so is this the first night? There were also reports from Girl Scouts and other units, so not the Kiowa unit? That's weird, claiming they heard a girl screaming during the night, but they either did not tell their counselor from their unit at the time, or they did tell their counselor, at which point they were told not to worry. It was assumed that if there was a problem, the counselors from whichever unit it was coming from would take care of it. So, I mean, is that a case of everyone assuming everyone else took care of something and nobody took care of anything? So, also it does state that there was a crowbar found. Investigators discovered a number of items, a flashlight with a fingerprint on it. It did not belong to anyone from the campsite. A crowbar, a bloody boot print in the tent, black duct tape, and a long black hair. What's weird though, why would they leave the crowbar, the murder weapon? Really weird. Also, just a sum up of the trial here, the defense carefully dismantled the prosecution's case. 1, the bloody footprint in the tent was too small to be Hart's. Another point I have to interject here, let's say Hart's guilty, or regardless of who's guilty, if another counselor did go into the tent but they didn't want anybody else to know because they thought they might be blamed or something or whatever, or who, I don't know, if there was a prowler screwing around, maybe one of the boys from the boys' camp nearby, and he was in there and he saw the mess and then he ran away, he's not going to let anybody know that he saw that. Or if he is, I mean, I don't know. Is there definitive evidence that the footprint that was there was made during the attack or a period of time after the attack? Also, if the bodies were carried out of the tent, there's no bodies in there. There's just blood. So somebody else could come in, step in the blood, not know what's going on. But continuing on here, 2, the fingerprint on the flashlight was not a match to Hart's. 3, the swabs taken from the girls were not conclusive. They were similar to Hart's, but not guaranteed to be a match. 4, it was claimed the hair was Hart's, but again, it only looked like Hart's hair. It doesn't mean it was. They can't do a DNA test? Really? This is weird. 5, they emphasized the possibility of evidence being planted to frame Hart. Here it's stating that it took 6 hours to deliberate the verdict. In other newspaper articles, it said minutes, so. A couple other points. Supposedly there were the knots in the cord that were used to tie something. I mean, it's unclear to what extent the bodies were tied up or simply restraints found near the bodies or in the tent. But there were 2 different types of knots used, and apparently the medical examiner also said there were 2 different murder weapons. One of them from a right-handed person, one from a left. Although I don't know how that could be definitively verified, but a couple of posts here, also on Unresolved Mysteries. My mother was at Camp Scott when this happened. She is convinced it was Hart. She was the nurse's assistant. She doesn't talk about it much, but I just think she has her mind made up as it being Hart. Could be for closure, I don't know. I forward her a link to this thread, but I'm doubtful she'll chime in. And yeah, that's also true. A lot of people simply want to believe in a certain outcome because for something to be unknown, that would just be much more terrifying. So, they take what they can, especially traumatized people. Here's another interesting post in terms of analyzing the screams and the situation. I'm going off what others have said in the thread, but in a documentary, apparently they interviewed the staff and they did hear screaming and stuff, but they dismissed it as screaming at the thunderstorms and the girls just playing. Which, as expletive up as it is in hindsight, girls of that age scream bloody murder all of the time for no expletive reason. I worked at an after-school program and I come from a household with no females except my mother. And the amount of times my blood pressure peaked in the first week of hearing the girls screaming as though they were being massacred was just insane. By the time I left that job, I probably wouldn't even notice a girl screaming if she was being murdered. Another poster posted this. Sadly, it might be precisely because they were in the furthest tent. Have you ever awakened a teenager at a normal daylight hour? It's difficult enough then. Now wake one up at 2 a.m. and ask them to find shoes and shuffle off into the dark to a distant tent. I'm not saying they shouldn't have checked, and I'm sure the poor counselors have beaten themselves up enough for that, but I think that distance and the late hour were definitely factors. An interesting post here also, which brings up some questions. The thing I find odd is if Hart was guilty, why did he claim innocence to the end? As it was pointed out, he admitted to the rapes of 2 pregnant women. I mean, that's kind of messed up. Also, it seems like the killer wanted to get caught from the beginning. First was the note in the donut box giving them a warning what was coming. The second thing is after the murders, while the camp was being watched by private security, someone was seen stalking around the murder site 3 times. And after one of those times, the sneakers and socks of one of the victims showed up on the steps of the camp director's cabin. And you know what really would be good too? If whoever was harboring Hart at the time, and there might have been more than one person, whatever his movements, can his movements be verified? Because, let's forget about the murder for a second. Who's dropping these sneakers and socks? Because if Hart's whereabouts can be accounted for at that moment, innocent or guilty, regardless, who the heck dropped these sneakers and socks? As if making fun of law enforcement because somebody was in the woods, whatever, they went to go check, and then while they're going to check, conveniently someone else slipped in and out unseen at the moment they were gone. I mean, it's just weird, and they didn't leave a single guy at the base. It would be, yeah, I mean, and It is kind of crazy. It's almost like a supernatural Native American shapeshifter skinwalker explanation would make sense here because the sheer amount of activity in and around the site. The only thing that points away from that is that security or law enforcement, whoever, they put those threads against trees to see if anybody broke them. You would think that, again, even an advanced Native American tracker, let alone a supernatural skinwalker, would they break those threads? I mean, I don't know. Also, all the weird stuff with the tracking dogs. I mean, especially if they're good tracking dogs. I mean, we're not talking about one dog and anomalies. I mean, there was multiple dogs, and they just randomly lose the scent. They're hot on the track, and then they randomly lose it and start looking at the sky. I mean, was this an alien? I mean, this is just, it's real. Like, when you add in all the bizarre oddities all together, like, by themselves, it's really, I mean, you could just write them off as anomalies, but once they start stacking up, it's kind of hard to ignore all of them. Another thing that nobody talks about, apparently there were 3 men who were hired to set up tents for the camp before the first day of camp. And they were on site for 5 days. They were never questioned by police. So those 3 men, they would know exactly the layout of the tents, the distances to the counselors. I mean, they would know everything. I mean, this is kind of bizarre. Couple more posts here. I've also read about Bill Stevens as a possible suspect. I read somewhere that Stevens was a former Vietnam vet. Is that correct? If so, that would explain the jungle boot prints in the tent. I saw the picture of the cave wall writing, and the date format looks like the type that the countries in Asia use. North Korea, for example, uses the year, month, day officially as the way they write their date, as do other countries in that region. Not to mention the witness that said they saw him in that morning in a cafe with blood and lacerations on his arm. It baffles me that no one heard the person walking through the woods. Okay, well, see, and the witness with the cafe story, so nobody else saw him in the cafe, it was only one person? And why would he walk into a cafe with blood? And I mean, it's weird. And then again, I mean, if his cellmate or whatever, the other guy in prison, said that he confessed to it, I mean, is that true? It's tough. It's really tough. Here's another baffling post here. I couldn't track down the source, but this is MINDSHOCK. I remember reading from someone, I honestly can't remember what site it was, purporting to be one of the Girl Scouts at Camp Scott that fateful night. She was meant to be in Tent 8 with the other girls, however, for some reason had ended up inside a tent with a group of older girls. She thought she was going to be transferred into Tent 8 that night, but the camp counselors said she would have to wait until morning. I believe she also reported more peculiarities, such as some girls were planning to meet up after lights out, but discovered that all their shoes had mysteriously vanished. What I can't remember is whether the person in question was said to be the daughter of one of the camp counselors or not. It is my personal belief that the killer had an accomplice on the inside, perhaps an unwilling one. It's possible that the note found inside the donut box wasn't a threat or a hoax, but rather a tip-off. After all, if it was the killer on the outside, how on earth was he able to drop a note inside the hut, and sneak out again without being detected? And why would he warn them in advance? I mean, there's a lot of weird stuff here. So here's a forum post. So Tapatalk has a lot of these arranged. I don't know where they came from or the original dates. But here we have this post here. I was in Camp Scott the night of the murders, although I do not recall which unit I was in. Lori Lee Farmer was a classmate of mine in 3rd grade. I still have a picture with her in it. I remember that night vividly. Laying on my cot in the tent with at least 2 other girls listening to the thunderstorm outside. The other girls kept complaining that squirrels were scratching on our tent, and maybe they were. We did hear a lot of scratching noises. Anyway, sometime in the middle of the night, myself and 2 other tent mates walked to the latrine to use the bathroom. Some other girls were coming back from the latrine and said they had seen someone coming down the trail within the woods towards them, shining a flashlight that had a red beam. We didn't believe them. With all the scary stuff going on as far as the weather was concerned, and of course it being most of our first nights away from our parents, We just thought they were playing with us. However, about 2 weeks later, it came out in the news that a flashlight was found with the bodies and it had red cellophane on the lens. That's when the whole thing hit home to me. This event has affected my life greatly. I was afraid to stay alone until I was in my late teens and have an anxiety disorder where I worry about everything still. Not sure the anxiety disorder was directly from this experience, but I'm sure it didn't help. I also developed a fascination with forensics and criminalistics because of it. I would really like to see this case solved. I would think after DNA testing was developed, they would have more info. Even if it just shows that Hart committed this crime, at least there would be some closure. I'm sure I'm not the only person who was there that night who has been affected by the whole thing. Another post here. I've often wondered the same thing. The investigators called all the girls to a hotel several weeks after the murders to question us. Man, that's a long time. I don't think I mentioned it, but maybe I did. I was afraid of the investigators. I remember them showing me pictures of some girl in wedding clothes and asking if I knew her, but not much else. Each unit has its own latrine, and I'd say it was about 100 to 200 yards from our tent. It was right up against the woods. It must have been between midnight and 2 a.m. when I went to the latrine with my tent mates. I don't really know, it was late. I'm not sure what time the attacks took place. So here's some more details about what's going on at the camp. Again, I don't know the source of who posted this. There was a different vibe shortly before the murders. There were definitely warnings, stolen articles, ominous warning notes, an effigy of a man found hanging by his neck, and shadowy figures. And talking about the camp, the place may not seem menacing now. I hope it is not reopened. There is obviously still a lot of interest in the murders, and reopening Camp Scott would re-sensationalize them in a way that would not be a good memorial for the victims and perhaps be insensitive to their surviving family members. Is anyone else as suspicious as I am of Carla Wilt? She heard scratching on a screen door during orientation week. She was the counselor to investigate the light out in the woods. She was the first to find a body on her way to the shower, even though she took an interesting route to the shower. She only found one of the bodies. The other two were way too close for her to see, and her answers are squirrely. Then finally, her eyeglasses were photographed with the bodies. She sure was a big part of this whole thing. I still wonder if she wore size 7 shoes. I'm not saying I think she was the murderer. I'm just saying I'm certain she didn't get any more than 5 hours of sleep that night, and I wonder if she got any. Another post here. I went to camp as a young girl 2 times. I went in 73, 74, and 75. My parents felt it was a good camp for me to attend. However, I remember hating it and being terrified every time I went out. Times were different back then, and people were more trusting. However, I remember everything about this camp as if I was there yesterday, and I always felt scared, and as a young girl of 10 years old, never felt like the camp counselors were close enough. And I remember writing letters to my parents and calling them, crying and begging them to come pick me up. I remember the girls in my tent, and I always heard noises outside the tent at night, like someone was walking around. And I slept every night with my head covered up because I was so scared. I dreaded it every night and couldn't wait to go home. I would never allow my child to go to a camp like this based on how it was laid out. The tents were not secure, and anyone could have come and gotten me as a child as well. I feel blessed and fortunate that I didn't get killed. I always knew I was scared to death every second I was there. So this has always haunted me even more, knowing that 3 beautiful girls were killed there only a few years after I was last there. And knowing I always heard someone walking around my tent. Was that the killer? Was he just trying to get the nerve to carry out the horrible act? It truly terrifies me to this day thinking about it. I mean, this is creepy stuff, but it's a good point, because is this a person who is intimately familiar with the layout of the camp? And were they doing stalking or prowling the camp the previous years? Now, some people believe, and I'll be getting to this shortly as well, the neighboring Boy Scout camp, I mean, I don't know how close it was, but somewhat close by, that supposedly boys snuck in or whatever, and is that what was going on? But let me read a few more posts here. I worked at the Girl Scout office when the murders happened. I was only in my 20s, but I remember the tour of the camp I was given as a new employee. Even as a young adult, I was struck with how dangerous the camp layout felt to me. I thought I would not let a child of mine come here. There was a haunting uneasiness about the place before the murders. I have always felt Hart did not commit the murders, and it was someone who lived close around the area. My hope is that they are not there anymore. I would like to see the camp utilized for the good of people, redeeming it. May the true murders be revealed in Jesus' name. Here's another interesting post. I know it's been years, and I was a little girl then, lived at Leach at the time this happened, but stayed a lot in Locust Grove at my dad's custom body shop. Leroy, as us kids called him, was a drunk, but he did not do this crime. The night of the murders, he was passed out in an old car at the body shop. My dad and his cousin Ed told the police that. The police even talked to my sister and me. They tried to get us to say that Leroy touched us in places he shouldn't have, but that just was not true. Leroy was a great guy, and as kids, we lost our drunken friend that we picked at and then run and hide. He and Ed would always come find us, chase us around, let us drive around in this field in an old car in a Chevy pickup. We had a lot of fun with Leroy and Ed. I was born in '65, and he never touched me in any wrong way or my sister. He didn't do that to those poor little girls. They need to reopen the case and find the real killer or killers. And another point that I do have to address, there's a lot of criminals and murderers out there that are just perfectly nice to certain people. And that's why those people would never believe that they committed any crime. Now, I'm not saying that's the case here, because if this alibi truly is legitimate, and he really was passed out in a car on the night of the murders, what does that mean? Here's another write-up here. Events leading up to the crime. Strange events were taking place around Camp Scott leading up to the murders. An effigy in the form of a man was found hanging from a tree by its neck, with its genitals showing. And personal items were disappearing from tents. The most interesting event was the discovery of a note in April which read, "We're on a mission to kill 3 girls in Tent 1. The note was considered a prank and never given to police. Crime. A storm hit the area around 6 p.m. causing heavy rain. Because of the weather, the campers were sent back to their tents. At approximately 1:30 a.m., moaning was heard near Camp Kiowa. Carla, a counselor at the time, checked out the noise and described it as a low, guttural moaning. It would stop whenever the beam of her flashlight came near. Carla was standing at the intersection of the trail 150 yards from Tent 8 and a dirt road leading to the main camp. At approximately 2 a.m., the tent flap of number 7 was opened. 3 of the girls inside were sleeping. The 4th girl stated that she noticed a beam of light moving about the interior from inside with the silhouette of a large figure behind it. The figure moved off toward Tent 8. Moaning sounds were heard throughout the night, not just by those in the Kiowa section, but those in 4 other units of the camp. At approximately 3 a.m., a girl in the Cherokee section across the woods heard a scream come from the direction of Kiowa, located about 2 city blocks away. A girl in Quapaw also heard a scream. The scream seemed to be cries of "Mama, Mama." The girl thought it may have been the voice of Lori Farmer. Wow, so this girl actually stated that it's possible that this was specifically her voice. At approximately 6 a.m., Carla found sleeping bags under a tree near the intersection in a pile. So why is it stating, I don't know the source of this, Carla checked out the noise at 1:30 a.m. with the flashlight, and whenever she put the flashlight towards the noise, it stopped. Okay. Huh. So at 6 a.m., she found the sleeping bags under a tree near the intersection. So at 1:30, she was out investigating and saw nothing. But at approximately 2 a.m., this 4th girl who wasn't sleeping inside tent 7 was the one that said she saw the beam of light and a silhouette of a large figure behind the light. And moaning sounds were heard throughout the night. This is just so creepy. The bodies, Doris Milner was found nude from the waist down with her pajama top pulled up underneath her arms. Her hands had been tied behind her back with duct tape and she had been beaten around the face. Around her neck, a cord and an elastic bandage were visible. A round, cylinder-shaped object about 4 inches long made of terry cloth was attached to the cord. The elastic bandage had been used as a blindfold, the terry cloth object as a gag. Michelle Heather Goose and Lori Farmer were found inside their sleeping bag. Both bodies had been bound into a tight, compact, fetal-like position. Evidence: Goose's and Farmer's sleeping bags contained bloody bed sheets that had been used by the killer to wipe down the blood found on the wood floor of the tent. Also found was a roll of black duct tape and a flashlight the murderer had discarded. Jack Schroff was the owner of a farm 1 mile to the west of Camp Scott whose house had been broken into. Some of the items taken from his home were a sash cord, a roll of duct tape, 3 bottles of beer, and 3 identical crowbars. The beer bottles were later found empty on the campground. Outside Schroff's door, a jungle boot-style print was found. It matched other boot prints found near the crime scene. So if this information is accurate, then that would mean that the killer really did burglarize Schroff's before heading over. Another boot print had been found on the blood-soaked floor of tent 8. Boot print size 10, and then also a possible tennis shoe size 7. Cause of death: Goose and Farmer were killed inside the tent. They were struck by a heavy blunt object in the back of their heads while they slept. Milner may have been led out of the tent, raped, and then killed. When found, her face had been beaten with such force that the object responsible had left behind its shape. She had died on the trail. Her cause of death was strangulation, not blunt force trauma. Man, this is terrible. At autopsy, it was revealed that 2 different types of knots had reportedly been used. Head wounds on 2 of the victims indicated 2 different blunt instruments. Analysis. Physical evidence left behind at the crime scene and evidence recovered during autopsy indicates that 2 offenders were involved in the crime. The nature of the crime scene was a mixed scene. All of the equipment necessary to commit the crime was brought along, yet no steps were taken to conceal the crime after it was committed. This indicates that 2 offenders were involved. The offenders would have left the area immediately after the crime. This crime is one that would have been planned months, possibly years in advance. The killers were probably good friends given the nature of the crimes. Because of the remoteness of the crime scene, the offenders knew the area well. They were probably either avid hunters or lived in the area. Only one of the girls was the intended target. The other 2 girls were most likely murdered because they could identify the offenders. One or both of the offenders may have had a history of sexual assault, possibly involving children. This may not have been the first murder for one or both of the offenders. The level of violence indicates that these offenders were not new to murder and had been involved in some type of violent crime previous to this one. However, the crime itself was sloppy and excessively violent, so this may have been the offender's first murder. The girls could have been led out of the tent or tied up and dragged out of the tent, killed in another location. That would have been more difficult to find, therefore concealing their identity. Instead, the victims were murdered inside the tent, leaving behind shoe prints and blood. The victims were all young girls that were surprised in their tent at night while probably sleeping. They were badly beaten and raped. This was the first step in the escalation of violence leading to murder. You know what else is kind of weird, though? Supposedly in the initial medical examiner reports that they stated they were not raped. So, yeah, we actually have plenty more to go over. There's a couple other theories. We still have to go over the theories for the neighboring boys' camp. And there's actually a couple other suspects that were brought up by astute online researchers, including family members of the suspects brought up. So we actually have plenty more to go over. So we'll be going over that in the follow-up episode. So hope you guys found another edition of MindShock True Crime interesting. If you want to help support the podcast, you can donate to our PayPal. Just check the link in the description. You can also become a YouTube member right here on YouTube. Make sure you subscribe to the channel, like and share. this podcast. Keep up awareness in unsolved cases like this one. Twitter, Facebook, Reddit, Patreon. Patrons do get priority for case topic, logical analysis, co-podcast, or requests. You could also be a guest in the podcast depending on your tier. Questions, comments, theories, thoughts, suggestions, rebuttals, debunkings of any kind, leave them in the comment section.